Right. So you guys sent in some seriously cool stuff on angels, specifically how they've been described like across different accounts and traditions.
Yeah.
So let's dive into this and see what we can find.
You know, one thing that struck me as we were looking at this is that it's really interesting because we're not dealing with hard science here, right? We're talking about faith, personal experiences, religious texts.
Yeah, it's not like a definitive list of angels,
Exactly.
like the top 10, Billboard charts of angels.
Exactly.
But we can look at some of the most prominent encounters. And that's what our source is talking about here.
Yeah, and one of the things the source emphasizes, too, is that the impact of the encounter often takes center stage, more so than a super detailed physical description.
Yeah, it's about like their essence.
Right.
What they're doing, the message they're bringing.
Exactly.
Not necessarily do they have wings or a halo or a flaming sword or whatever.
Yeah, precisely. And that suggests that a lot of these appearances are symbolic, pointing to something beyond just a literal interpretation.
Okay, so let's start with a name that people probably know pretty well.
Okay. Yeah.
Gabriel.
Okay.
He's like the A-list celebrity of angels.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, he's mentioned in both the Bible and the Quran.
Yeah.
And the source really highlights how crucial he is as a messenger in both Christianity and Islam.
He's the one who delivers the news of John the Baptist's birth and then later Jesus's birth.
Right.
In Islam, he's the one who reveals the Quran to the Prophet Muhammad. Those are some pretty high-stakes deliveries.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, too, because, his role is super defined, but in a lot of the source material, his appearance is left very open to interpretation.
That's interesting. Why do you think that is?
I think that's a great question. Is the message more important than the messenger's appearance?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that it almost seems as if the focus is deliberately placed on the weight of his pronouncements, the sheer impact of his message, rather than getting bogged down in the physical details.
Right, and we have these classic artistic representations of him, which have become so iconic.
Yeah.
With the wings and the radiating light and the trumpets.
You're absolutely right. I mean, those images have become almost universally recognized.
Yeah.
As like a shorthand for important heavenly messenger.
It makes you think, what would that actually be like?
Right.
To come face to face with something like that.
Yeah.
With a being like that.
And to receive news.
Yeah.
That could potentially change the course of history.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Absolutely.
So our source material also talks about an encounter that's a little bit different.
Okay.
It's less about a specific angel and more about like the awe-inspiring experience itself.
Yeah.
So the angel appearing to Moses in the Bible. Now this one is interesting because there are a lot of forms that this angel takes.
Yeah, you're spot on. We have the burning bush that's talking, the pillar of fire that's guiding the Israelites, the radiant light that appears before Moses. The source emphasizes here that the focus isn't so much on the specific form the angel takes, but on the power of the message that is being given.
Yeah, it's like, hey, pay attention to what's being said.
Right.
Not the special effects.
Exactly.
And of course, this kicks off the Exodus story, which is such a pivotal moment in Jewish tradition.
This is the beginning of the Israelites' journey to freedom. And this angelic encounter is what sets everything in motion.
And there's also that layer of mystery, too.
Right.
Like some scholars even believe that this angel of the Lord that's being talked about might be a pre-incarnate Jesus.
Yeah.
So that's a whole other
rabbit hole.
Yeah, rabbit hole to go down.
To explore.
Okay, so we've got the messenger Gabriel.
Yeah.
We've got this awe-inspiring manifestation before Moses.
Right.
Now our source takes us to something that feels completely different.
Okay.
The angels at the tomb of Jesus.
So this is where the tone of the source shifts a little bit towards hope and peace.
Yeah.
And it describes these angels as figures in dazzling white clothing, radiating like lightning.
Yeah.
And they're not there to deliver a warning or pronounce judgment.
Right.
They're the ultimate bearers of good news.
Yeah.
Announcing the resurrection to the people that came to mourn Jesus' death.
What I find so interesting is those descriptions of light.
Right.
It really evokes a sense of peace for me. Like everything's going to be okay, despite the fact that they're surrounded by, grief and loss.
That's a beautiful observation, and it really ties into the significance of this encounter for Christianity. The angels at the tomb solidify this concept of resurrection and eternal life, which, offer a lot of comfort and hope to believers.
Okay, now get ready for some crazy imagery.
Okay.
Because our source talks about descriptions of angels seen by prophets.
Okay.
Like Ezekiel.
Yeah.
And Isaiah.
Okay.
And these are not your typical...
Your garden variety.
Yeah, garden variety winged figures.
Cherubs.
These are beings that are so complex and otherworldly.
Yeah.
They almost defy description.
Ezekiel's visions are incredibly detailed and complex. He describes multi-faced beings, wings, wheels within wheels, fire.
Wow.
An overwhelming sense of divine power.
Yeah.
Isaiah describes these 6-winged seraphim, which are a type of angel associated with purifying fire and God's holiness.
It makes you wonder if human language is even capable of capturing what these prophets saw.
You're right. I mean, these visions go beyond simple messages. They're designed to evoke awe and wonder, revealing something profound about the nature of God and the workings of the cosmos.
So we've gone from Gabriel, the relatively straightforward messenger, to these beings that are just like almost indescribable.
Mind-boggling. Yeah. Our source is really pointing out how diverse these angelic encounters can be.
Exactly. And reflecting, the richness and complexity of how they've been perceived across different faiths and throughout history.
Right. And then we have this type of angel that I think a lot of people feel a personal connection to.
Yeah.
Guardian angels.
This idea of a personal protector watching over you.
Yeah.
The Force describes them as having a more human-like appearance, often with wings, emanating a soft, comforting light.
And their role is all about security.
Right.
That someone's always got your back, even when you're facing tough times.
Absolutely.
It's nice to think about that.
It is a comforting thought, isn't it? That even when you feel alone, that you might have this unseen ally.
A source of strength and guidance.
It's a nice thought.
Yeah. And what's really fascinating, I think, is that even if we interpret these descriptions symbolically, they still tap into a very real human need that we have.
So as we wrap up this first part of our dive into angels, what's like a takeaway?
I think the big question is what do you think the concept of a guardian angel, even as a symbolic representation, says about our hopes and fears? What deeper need within us does it speak to?
Absolutely.
We'll continue exploring these ideas and more when we come back for part 2 of our angelic deep dive.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So welcome back to our deep dive into angels. And before we go too much further, I kind of wanted to circle back to that idea of guardian angels.
Okay.
These personal protectors watching over us.
Right.
Even if we view them symbolically, it's a concept that seems to resonate with a lot of people.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
It's such an interesting question, even across, diverse cultures and religions. A lot of these accounts use very similar imagery to describe angels. Light wings, a sense of both power and peace.
Right.
It's almost as if these recurring motifs point towards some universal human desire to connect with something greater than ourselves.
Yeah, like we instinctively reach for these images, these archetypes when we try to describe experiences that seem to be outside of our normal everyday reality.
That's a great point. And that's where symbolism comes in, right?
Yeah.
It allows us to grasp concepts that might otherwise be beyond our comprehension.
Right.
I mean, take wings, for example. They're not just about physical flight. They represent freedom, transcendence, a connection to the divine.
Light associated with purity knowledge, the divine presence.
And it's fascinating how these symbols appear again and again in accounts of angelic encounters.
Makes you wonder if there's something ingrained in our collective consciousness about these archetypes.
Absolutely. It's like these ways of representing the spiritual realm. Maybe they act as like a bridge. Between the known and the unknown.
Okay, so we've talked about these big names like Gabriel. I've explored these visions.
Yeah.
What other interesting things came up for you in the source material?
One thing that really struck me was the emphasis on the purpose of these angelic encounters. It's rarely just a random appearance. There's usually a specific reason for the angel to manifest in the human world.
It's like with Gabriel.
Yeah.
He's all about these announcements.
Absolutely.
These pivotal moments,
Yeah. Precisely. And even in those more, complex visions, like the ones described by Ezekiel and Isaiah, There's a clear sense that, they're meant to reveal something important about God's nature, about the workings of the universe.
It's not just, hey, look, an angel.
Right.
It's like, pay attention. This is important.
Exactly. It's about conveying a deeper truth.
Yeah.
A message that's meant to, guide, inspire, or even warn humanity.
Right.
I mean, these encounters carry weight and significance.
Yeah, that brings up an interesting question.
Yeah.
What are we supposed to make of these accounts today?
Right.
How do they relate to our modern lives?
Right. Especially if you're someone who might not interpret them literally.
Exactly.
That's the key question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's about finding the relevance, the personal meaning in these ancient stories and traditions.
Yeah.
Maybe it's about looking for the symbolic significance,
What?
the underlying messages that still resonate with us on a deeper level.
For example, that feeling of being protected by a guardian angel.
Right.
Maybe it's not about a literal winged being.
Exactly.
But it's about those moments where we feel supported and guided, even when we don't know why.
That's such a good point.
Yeah.
It could be about trusting our intuition.
Right.
That inner voice that sometimes seems to steer us in the right direction.
Right. Or recognizing the kindness and support we receive from others.
Absolutely.
When someone unexpectedly shows up for us, it's like those acts of kindness become a manifestation of that guardian angel energy.
Exactly.
Even if we don't think about it in those terms.
Yeah, it's about finding those connections.
Right.
Those echoes of the spiritual realm in our everyday experience.
Yeah.
And recognizing that, perhaps we're not as alone as we sometimes feel.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this part of our exploration, what would you want our listener to think about?
I would say this. Whether you approach these accounts of angelic encounters from a place of faith, skepticism, or somewhere in between, there's a richness to these stories. Yeah. A depth of symbolism that's worth exploring.
Right. And, you might just find some unexpected insights into your own beliefs and hopes and fears along the way.
And we'll be back in just a moment to finish up our deep dive into the world of angels and leave you with a final thought.
Sounds good.
But until then, keep those wings of curiosity spread wide.
Welcome back to our deep dive. And, it's interesting, like all these accounts of angels, even the ones that seem like far out and crazy, they spark some pretty deep questions.
Yeah. And it's interesting how these stories that have been told for centuries across cultures, they continue to resonate with people even today.
Yeah. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it taps into something really fundamental about the human experience, this longing that we have for connection, our search for meaning.
Right.
And maybe even this desire to see beyond just the ordinary.
Yeah, and as we've been looking at these accounts, what's been really cool is just the sheer variety of angelic encounters. We've got those messengers like Gabriel, and then we have these crazy visions that Ezekiel and these prophets had.
Yeah, and it's like a whole spectrum, and it's really cool.
It's like there's a specific type of encounter for the message being delivered.
That's a really good observation, I think. Yeah. It's almost as if the type of encounter reflects the message itself.
Yeah.
A straightforward messenger for, those clear announcements. A more complex, awe-inspiring being for those deeper revelations about the divine.
Right. It's like a communication system.
Yeah.
From, somewhere else.
Cosmic communication system.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then you have the guardian angels.
Right.
Offering this comfort and protection on a more personal level. Some people might look at that and say, oh, that's just wishful thinking.
Yeah.
But I think it speaks to something very human.
Yeah. It's a powerful concept, isn't it?
Yeah.
That there's some force or some presence that's watching over us, even when we feel vulnerable or lost.
Even if you look at it symbolically, that psychological impact is pretty undeniable.
Absolutely.
It's like just the belief can be really powerful.
I think you're right.
It
can give a sense of hope.
Yeah.
Source of strength when things are tough.
And I think that's something we all need sometimes.
Right.
No matter what your spiritual beliefs are.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes these angelic encounters so fascinating.
Yeah.
Even though they were recorded thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
It's that human search for meaning and connection, for a touch of the divine in our daily lives.
Yeah. So as we wrap up our angel deep dive.
Okay.
What would you say is the final thought to leave with everyone?
I would say, keep an open mind.
Yeah.
Whether you see these stories as literal truths, symbolic representations, or somewhere in between, There's a lot there.
Yeah.
A lot of wisdom and meaning to explore. Just be curious, question, and see what resonates most strongly with you.
Yeah.
You never know what you might discover.
Beautifully put.
Thank you.
And listeners, as always, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep that sense of wonder alive.
Yeah.
Until next time, may all your journeys be filled with light and inspiration.